Welcome everyone to the Rutherford County School regular board session. Turn it over to the director.
Okay, we do elect a chairman this evening, so I'll preside for the first couple of items. And again, welcome for the September 20th, 2017 meeting. If you'll join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if you will, join us for a moment of silence, please. And of course, we try to remember with the hurricane, so many people in not only Texas, but Florida and through really much of the Caribbean area in the last few days. So please join us for a time of silence, please. Okay, thank you. Looking at our agenda, we'll begin with the election of the 2017-18 board officers, and the floor is now open for nominations for chairman of the Rutherford County Board of Education for 2017-18. Mr. Blair?
I would like to nominate Mr. Jeff Jordan as our chairman. Mr. Odom?
Okay. Mr. Jeff Jordan's been nominated.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Holliday. Additional nominations? Take that there's no additional nominations. Okay. Everyone in favor of the motion to elect Mr. Jeff Jordan as the chairman of Rutherford County School Board for 2017-18, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Likewise. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
I can now turn it over to you for the vice chair.
Okay.
You're in charge.
Thank you, board. I appreciate your confidence, and if I make a mistake, which I will, I'm sure you'll correct me quickly. We need a nomination for vice chair. Mr. Hodge?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that Mr. Estes be vice chair.
A second to that nomination? Second. Mr. Young, thank you. Are there other nominations for vice chair? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And oppose? Anyone? No? Congratulations, Mr. Estes. Thank you. Moving on through the agenda, we do have one addition here. The approval agenda, does anybody have a comment on the number 5? If not, we'll go to 6, the consent agenda, and the director wants to comment, but before he does, anyone else have anything on the consent agenda? Okay, Mr. Director, please.
We received a couple of late volunteer coaches positions. If you want to accept those on your list tonight, Ms. Lindsay Halford did send in a name. This is a person to be a non-faculty person to assist Siegel High School Band. And the name is Sarah Holmes. She would ask us if we would add that. Mr. Tackett gave me some additional ones, a couple of names that didn't get in time to make it on the initial agenda. And this was Stewart's Creek High School Wrestling. And so the name for that is Zachary Stafford and Brian Helton.
Director, the names that you've brought to us, they've met all of the appropriate criteria. They just did not get on the printed agenda. Right. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm gonna just reach back on point of order, and on item 5, don't we need a motion to approve the agenda?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay, so I'm going to move to approve the agenda as presented in item 5.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. I apologize, board. Any other comment on 5? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, now 6, and you heard what the director said.
At this time, I'll move to approve the consent agenda as amended by the director with the 3 names added.
Need a second?
Second.
I believe that's Mr. Hodge. Any further comment? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Ms. Michaels, we have visitors tonight. No one to address the board. Old business, swimming pools discussion. I think we have pretty much taken care of that last night, or at least discussed it in full. But I promised you an opportunity tonight. I don't know if we said everything you wanted to say last night or not. But is there anything about the swimming pools that we want to discuss, or are we in good shape there? Okay, spotlight on education, Mr. Director.
Spotlight on education tonight. I'll ask Mr. Duke if he'll come up to the podium. I did ask him to do our spotlight tonight because there were 3 versions of Tennessee's ESSA plan. The last version was approved August 24th. And I know you're about to go to a meeting where we'll talk about legislative agendas and some things related to that. So that we would have some of the terminology and all, if you have questions, he's going to kind of give you a brief overview of what's in the ESSA plan and the changes associated with that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Board, and thank you, Mr. Odom, for having us out. As Mr. Odom said, we are looking at what's now the final approved ESSA plan. The federal government did approve that, the Department of Education. So I'm going to go through just a few high points tonight, kind of a big picture, 360 view of some key things that we're going to want to be aware of as a district as well. So the federal government, as you can see, did approve that back on August 30th of this year. So the last month we've been kind of pouring into that, looking at what it means for us as a district and how we're going to apply that now that it all is final. And as Mr. Odom said, there were 3 iterations of it before it finally went through. So I'm going to kind of point out just a couple major themes here, and I think this is a good one to start it with. And that's what Commissioner McQueen has said, is that the plan is really built on the belief that every student should be ready for post-secondary when they graduate. So as you look through the plans and look through the accountability features and what we have to do, there is a very big theme on post-secondary readiness, and are our students who are graduating able to go into the workforce and go on to post-secondary instruction. So there's 3 kind of big areas I want to hit with you tonight. One is what the state is referring to as our historically underserved students. Just a brief look at school accountability, how our schools are going to be held accountable this year, and then also the district as well. And just again, like I said, kind of a big picture 360 view of it. We're working with the schools as we go through into more detail on some of the rules of that, but for our purposes tonight, we'll look a little broader. So let's start with what we mean by historically underserved students. And the state has identified 4 groups of students, students who have been historically underserved and lower performing students in our state. You can see the first one is a racial and ethnic group, and that is a combination of our Black, Hispanic, and Native American students. That is one of the groups we're going to be looking closely at. The second one is our students who are economically disadvantaged. The third being students with disabilities, and the fourth being our English language learners. So these are students that, as we talk about subgroups, as we talk about certain subsets of students that the state is really paying a lot of attention to, and how are we working and growing these specific students in our district?
Will these be the only subgroups that we track?
And there's kind of 2 different pots here. So as we go through the school accountability, these are the major 4 that we're looking at. Once our school has a grade, and I'll go back to that in a second, they will then look at subgroups of students who fall in each one of the racial and ethnic categories, so Asians by itself, Hispanic students by themselves, as kind of a secondary look to see are any of those individual groups underperforming in that school or in that district. That's kind of a secondary feature once you get past and once you get to your school grade. And as I go through it and I'll show how we get to that school grade, I'll add that in. But these are the 4 major subgroups we have in the state that we're looking at. And again, this is straight from the plan. And so as we talk about major themes tonight, here's an important one. The state has said under their all means all branch that subgroup performance should have a significant impact on an overall school grade. And that's not our words, those are the state words. And so as they talk about writing this plan, not only is there this theme of post-secondary readiness, but there's also this theme of how are our subgroups performing, and that performance should have a major impact on how the school performs overall. As we continue to talk about these 4 subgroups, one of the things we want to point out from the beginning is when you look at these subgroups, that the achievement and growth for these students are going to comprise 40% of the district and individual school accountability. So these subgroups alone and how they perform, they will end up counting 40% of the school's accountability grade, as well as 40% of the district's overall rating. And again, straight from the plan, as that theme continues, and this is from the district accountability plan, they want to point out again that if a district is failing to make progress with its lowest achieving students, the state is saying you are in need of improvement. So we're looking at not just how all of our students are doing, but specifically how are these subgroups performing, and what the state has said historically have been underserved students in our state. So we're again working as a district to make sure we're addressing those, which we always have done, will continue to do, and as we move forward with that. So with that in mind, of that 40% of the school accountability and the subgroup play, let's kind of take a brief look at how our schools are going to be held accountable as we move forward and as we work for this year. We know that ESSA requires, the federal law requires that all schools be differentiated annually, that schools are looked at and that they have an assignment or they are differentiated in some way. So Tennessee state legislation is doing that through the A to F letter grade. So again, I'll point out that the A to F letter grade is not a federal requirement. That is how the state is meeting the fact that all schools are going to be differentiated annually. And I'm sure there's been conversations about this before, but we know our schools currently are working on what will be their first letter grade assignment that will be given to the public next year. Timetable, I'm not exactly sure. I would assume summer or early fall that school will get a letter designation for their overall performance. And that's how Tennessee is meeting that part of ESSA. What I think is a positive note is that the ESSA plan really does give multiple measures to show the range of ways we serve our students. So we're looking at not just proficiency, how are they doing on one test. You'll notice as we go through these that of the accountability areas, and the areas we're looking at, 2 of them are what we're used to, meaning they're on that end of the year high stakes test, but 2 of the factors are separate from the end of the year high stakes test. So we have multiple ways to show how we serve our students and show real areas of strength in our building. And again, another positive note about this, which is different than how it's been in the past, is that all schools do have the opportunity to be an A, or as the state's also calling a reward school. So in the past, that had been capped, only a certain percentage of students could be labeled a reward school. So although it is a high bar, any school that crosses that bar will have that opportunity to be an A school. So as we look at it, I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit. This is a brief graphic we're looking at, and I'd kind of like to point out what I've circled there at the bottom, which is that overall school grade. Each school will get that overall school grade, but if you kind of work your way up, that overall school grade is really a combination of all the grades above it in the different areas I was discussing on how the schools will be held accountable. So briefly, we'll kind of hit those. The first area is achievement, and this is for K-12, and in just a second I'm going to hit 2 additional areas that are just for high school. So that first area they're going to be looking at is how are we doing achievement-wise? In other words, what we used to just refer to as being proficient or not, or where they need to be. So our new terminology there is, are the students on track for post-secondary success? So we'll be looking at what percentage of our students in that building are considered on track. They're meeting that bar on that end of the year state test. Or are they above that bar? The second one has to do with growth. And growth is what we use with our TVOS model, and it's basically saying maybe the student is not proficient yet, but we are showing growth with this student. He was in a lower subcategory, he was below where he should have been, he's gone up, he hasn't hit proficiency yet, but we are showing growth with this student. This is somewhere we do very well. I believe Mr. Odom shared with you our growth scores last night as the district, and that's usually somewhere in the district, away in the district this year, we've done really well. Both of those, achievement and growth, of course, apply to that end of the year test that we do our 10 Ready assessment. You can see the percentage there, it's weighted pretty heavy. Achievement is going to be 45% of the score. Are the students proficient or not? And the growth score will make up 35% of that. So again, very high accountability on that end of the year stakes test. The next area is outside of the test, and it has to do with our students, and that's the percentage of our kids that are chronically out of school. So this is looking at absenteeism rates for kids who are not coming to school for some reason, and also includes the percentage of out-of-school suspension. So when a kid is not in the building, and when a kid is not there to receive the instruction, the state is looking at that, and what are we as a school doing to decrease that number? To increase that student's opportunity to learn, they need to be in the building. And so just like we will have goals for the percentage of kids that we get to on track or get to proficiency, schools will have goals about the percentage of kids that they decrease from being chronically out of school. So we're really looking at this again as a school. It's the first time that we're, as far as an accountability, that schools are being held accountable for decreasing the percentage of kids who are chronically out of school. So this is a new challenge for schools and how to address that. The last area would be ELPA, and that's our English language proficiency assessment. And this is weighted at 10% of the school's grade, just as chronically out of school is. So it's a little less of a weighting, or significantly less weighting than the achievement and growth. In Rutherford County in Tennessee, our English language proficiency assessment is called the WIDA Access, and that is for students who are currently English language learners, and it's the assessment they take beginning in February of each year, and it's measuring, are they progressing toward English proficiency, and how are we doing as moving our kids who are getting English language services and moving them toward English proficiency. So again, that's kind of outside of that standard end of the year high stakes 10 ready assessment, but it's still an important assessment we do, and are we moving students toward proficiency? So when you look at that for K-12, and again in a second I'll hit the additional 2 for high school, we're looking at those and we're saying these are the 4 measures that will then go into that overall school grade. So we'll get a grade for each one of those: achievement, growth, chronically out of school, and our ELPA assessment, and then that will factor into that overall school grade. If you remember what I said at the beginning, one of the major themes was that a subgroup's performance will have a major impact on the school's overall grade. So as you can kind of see here, we're going to look at these and we're going to measure these areas, or the state will measure them for all the students in our building. Then if a school has an appropriate number of students in those subgroups, they will actually pull those students out and look at how just that subgroup of students did, and assign them a grade for that. So every area, achievement, growth, chronically out of school, and ELPA that we're looking at for every student in the building, we will look at separately for our subgroups that count. You can see down here, as I mentioned earlier, the all students grade will be 60% of our score, and that subgroup grade will make up 40% of our overall school grade. For high school, we have 2 additional areas we're looking at. In addition to the ones I mentioned earlier, and this is the high school chart on the side so you can see the addition of 2 different indicators. The first one is that ready graduate indicator. So we're very used to graduation rate in Rutherford County and the state and looking at graduation rate. Ready graduate, it goes to that additional step. It's looking not just at kids who are graduating, but the percentage of those graduates who demonstrate those skills for either post-secondary readiness, military readiness, or workforce readiness. And they measure that by ACT scores of 21 or higher. The military criteria will be a score yet to be determined on the ASVAB or the other military readiness assessments we give in our schools. And then those early post-secondary opportunities. So that's our dual credit, our dual enrollment, our IB program, advanced placement classes. And so when they talk about the ready graduate, they're not just looking at how many kids graduate, but how many of those students that graduate also have a 21 on their ACT, or also have passed the military criteria placement assessment, or how many also have some industry certifications with them to really emphasize what I said at the beginning, that focus on post-secondary. Now, this year, and this is a little sidebar, for this year, they're only looking at that ACT of 21. So that ready graduate indicator will be significantly lower than maybe the graduation rate we're used to seeing, just because of the number of students in our district who may not be at that 21 yet. They are still looking at graduation rate. I want to point that out. That's that adjusted 9th grade cohort, as we've looked at before. They are still looking at that as a separate indicator, but if you notice, the ready graduate is 20% of the school's overall score, where that straight graduation rate is only 5%. So it's significantly lower than our students who are ready graduates. So again, when you look at for high schools, these 6 areas for both all students and the subgroups that account for them, those will be factored into that grade for the all students grade, the subgroup grade, and at that 60-40% split, we'll get an overall school grade. Yes, sir.
The growth category again, is growth only recognized when it's within line of grade level?
So growth is looked at through our TVAS system, and I may defer to Mr. Odo on this to see if he wants to expand on it a little bit. So it's looking at any growth compared to the cohort of students they were with and how they move forward. So if a student was significant, if a student was at below basic and was maybe at the 5th or 6th percentile and then moved and progressed up to the 10th, he's still not proficient, but he did show value, and you would calculate a growth on that.
It's a moving number because they kind of do averages across the state to determine, you saw some of it in effect scores.
Right.
3 is the average across the state, better than the average for a year in school, a year's growth. They measure it with scale scores if you want to get in statistics, but if you get a year, you get a 3. If you get more than a year, it's a 4, and even more than a year, it's a 5. That's what they measure.
We always...
The growth column that we're looking at there is moving a student in one of those 4 bands from below to approaching, or from approaching to
Can you go back 2 slides?
from on track to
1 second.
action. That's what that growth column, that subgroup growth column is talking about there.
Yeah, and if you talk about, and the best analogy is the way we were taught back in the days of the track, right? If the goal is to go around the track 1 time, that would be a 3. If you start significantly behind the start line, if you still make it around that track to where you started, that would be equivalent of a 3. So it's not about getting to a proficiency bar, it's did I grow, did I maintain, fall behind, or exceed the growth of my peers?
That was, but the growth of your peers is 1 lap around the track. It's not 1 lap around the 7th grade track, you know, and so it doesn't have to be up to, you don't have to catch up
Exactly.
in order
Yeah,
to get up.
You're exactly right.
Got it.
They're moving from where you're at currently.
Okay. The only other question I had was on ELPA. Is there any way of averaging, or some districts in our state have got 2%, non-English proficient students? We have an enormous number. We're the 3rd largest in the state. Are they?
Accountability kicks in with 30 students. So what happens in this case, and the way, let's take a high school for example, English 2, English 1, English 2, and English 3. If you happen to have, out of all those Englishes, 30 students, then that subgroup will count for you. But if you do not, then you skip that one. Most schools in the state will have at least 1, maybe it's economically disadvantaged, free reduced lunch. If they got 30 in the assessed grades, typically it's going to be, looks like 2nd grade through whatever grade it might be, but
You can also point out, as he's talking about with accountability and ELs counting, English learners counting, as he said, for achievement and growth, that's an in count of 30. For that ELPA assessment, the WIDA access, it's important to remember that's a separate assessment from 10 Ready, and the accountability number for that is actually 10. And if you have 10 students that will be tested on that WIDA access, 10 viable tests, you'll actually get a score for that ELPA assessment.
Yeah, but their score, if they've got 12 and we've got 2,012, then they're going to have an easier time of getting their 12 over that hump, aren't they?
You know,
I think there's
Okay.
an economy of scale there, probably.
You're allowing 12 students to determine that entire percentage for your whole school, where 2012, you're dealing with, and you've got more systems in play.
and again, the ELPA is about advancement towards English language proficiency, so it's looking at the growth that they're making on that ELPA assessment. All right. Any other questions on that?
Yeah, actually, I'm just curious, if you've got a smaller school system that falls under that 10, which I don't know if there are any or not, but just out of curiosity, how are they gonna make up that?
So
Where's
if,
that 10%
yeah,
from?
exactly. So if, and we may have some schools that may not have and this is school accountability that we're looking at now. So we may have schools that would not have 10 viable tests. They would increase the achievement by 5% and increase the growth by 5%. Same situation if you had a school that did not meet 30 students in a subgroup of some reason, and actually if you have none, and this gets a little more detailed than I plan on going, but just as an overview, if you have no subgroup that equals 30, they would look at combining certain students. If you still didn't have 30, then it would just come from that all-student category. But again, and I think the important thing is when we get the report card, one of the things the commissioners talked a lot about is transparency. And are we being transparent? So my assumption is that not just that overall school grade will be shown, that may be told, but on the report card, I would assume, my assumption is based on what the commissioner is saying about transparency, that all these, that we'll look and see how we're doing in each one of these areas. That's a little bit about school accountability. So let's just hit, again, a brief overview of the district accountability and how the district's going to be held accountable. There are 6 areas that Rutherford County is going to have to, that Rutherford County will be looked at in terms of accountability. The first is 3-5 success rate, which is our elementary schools, of course. And again, success rate being that ELA math and science proficiency, the number or percentage of students we have proficient in ELA math and science. 6-8 success rate for our middle schools, and then 9-12 success rate for our high schools. It's important to point out that 9-12 success rate includes the ACT 21 score and the percentage of students meeting that. So we add ACT back in there for that 9-12 success rate. Just like the schools, the district is going to be looked at in terms of the chronically out of school students, and what are we doing to decrease that percentage? Just like the schools, we'll be looking at K-12 English language proficiency as a district, and then also at the graduation rate for the district. So when I thought about what to kind of explain in terms of the district accountability, I thought it was important for us to look at this minimum progress goal. Before we really get into accountability for the school, the district is going to have to pass what the state calls a minimum progress goal. In other words, if you don't do these few things, your district will automatically go to in needs of improvement. So I wanted to make sure you guys knew what that was. Again, there's 4 checks that could move us, and we'd have to hit them. The first one is we have to have a 95% test participation rate in all of our grade bands, and that includes our ACT and our subgroup. So are we assessing 95% of our students? The second one has to do with achievement, which is, are we increasing that on-track or mastered, or what we used to call proficiency? Are we increasing the percentage of students in that band for at least 33% of the eligible areas we have? So that may be one grade band. So at least in 3-5, we are moving achievement there, even if we're not in the other ones. The value added goal is same thing. In at least one of the 33% of our eligible areas, are we getting a TVAS level of 3? And then finally is the subgroup goal. Are we reducing the percentage of students scoring at the lowest levels of achievement in our combined subgroup for 33% of the eligible areas? So we have to have kind of what they say a minimum achievement goal. Are you at least in one area showing that you've moved more kids to proficiency? A minimum value added goal in at least one of those areas. We have made that year's growth for a year's time in school, and at least in one of those, 33% of those areas, we are reducing our subgroup students who are below or not proficient. And so if a district, which I do not anticipate us being in this field at all, if a district in all of their areas either are not showing growth or not decreasing those subgroups in the lowest percentile or not testing 95%, it's kind of a stop. You immediately go to in needs of improvement for your district.
What would you say our possibility of hitting any of those 4 circuit breakers is?
Mr. Odom, you?
I don't see a particular problem because we've been testing more than 95% typically on ACT. I mean, you have some, they actually was only 80%, 85% for this last year. It does go to 95% for this year. And I think our schools will meet that. That one would have a potential. But the state pays for all those tests, so kids are taking that. The thing, I don't see one of the others that we're not historically been able to attain.
Okay.
You know, they threw the mines out across the field. You see how complex this thing is. There's a lot of ways you can miss it. There's a number of ways you can make it. There's also a lot of ways that you can get dinged with all these areas. That's one of the things I want y'all to understand, the complexity of this thing.
So when you're looking at, again, the district accountability, so when you talk about those 6 areas, for the district, there's a couple different ways they're going to measure us. One is absolute performance, which just kind of basically says, are we in the top 20% of the state, or whatever that benchmark is. In other words, our achievement is so high that even if we miss maybe a target they've set for us, they're going to give us the grade, or say we've met it just because we're traditionally high. And a good example of this on a school level would be like Central Magnet, where they have extremely high achievement, and maybe they were at 98%, and the goal was 99. Well, they didn't make 99, they stayed at 98. But compared to the rest of the state and their absolute performance, they're so high, the state's gonna say they've met that. So that would be kind of what that is. So they're gonna look at that, where we rank in the state. Also, for each of those areas, they'll set a target for us, whether it's for chronically out of school, whether it's for our K 3, 5, 6, 8, or 9, 12 success rate. So did we meet that target, or are we just such a high-performing district? But they'll give us the better of those two, and then they'll combine a value-added measure, which is a growth measure. For each of those 6, there will be a growth measure. So
AMO is annual measurable objectives. In other words, did you move the math up? Did you move the ELA up? Did you move the science up? They set a goal for you. Did you make that goal or not?
And what they're saying right now, those goals are going to be set is basically reducing your non-proficiency by 50% over 8 years. It's kind of how they'll tick out that goal, is how it's written. I say that to say, again, when they look at us as a school with absolute performance or our target, they're going to look at the better of the two and then combine that with the value added. So just as the school has multiple areas, as a district we have multiple areas that we're going to be held accountable for. And that kind of takes us to the end with district accountability. I wanted to point this out. These at the bottom is how the district will ultimately get the designation we get. In need of improvement would be we didn't pass that minimum progress goal. We didn't do kind of the bare minimum the state has set for us. Other than that, we'll be looking at marginal, satisfactory, advancing, or exemplary. But I wanted to point out here, just as in the schools, this final determination, 60% will be based on how our school district as a whole do, with 40% looking at those subgroups of historically underserved kids. All that to kind of wrap up in some final thoughts that I thought I'd throw out just to kind of keep in mind. First of all, we know that our subgroup performance is a priority. Are we not just addressing the needs of all kids, but are we specifically addressing the needs of students who the state has said are historically underserved and fall in those subgroups? And that has to be a priority for us under this model. It always has been a priority, and it will continue to be. I think it's important that we realize that achievement alone, in the absence of student growth, will not earn the greatest reward. So we may have higher achievement, but if we're not showing growth and we're not moving all students, then we're going to not make that highest designation. So we can't just focus on achievement, we've got to focus on achievement and growth. Again, we've always done that, but it's kind of putting it in one model now. And finally, participation rates are going to be of critical importance, right? We don't want something as simple as not testing enough students to move us as a district into in needs of improvement. So that's kind of, just a big picture 360 overview of where we're looking at and some things that we're continuing to know as a district and how to best support our schools in meeting these high bars. Questions?
I have one. On these subgroups, the underserved students, and that being 40% of our grade, do we know what the statistics are on what percentage of our student population those subgroups actually make up?
So I had Mr. Delbridge run me some numbers and asked his department to look at that. And so when you're looking at our current numbers, if you're looking, for instance, at our free and reduced lunch, technically right now are economically disadvantaged, and I have to do a little asterisk here in the fact and how the state qualifies students as economically disadvantaged is whether or not they're getting direct certification. I mean, actually the state comes to us and says, here are the students that are getting some kind of governmental program that would qualify them to be economically disadvantaged. Now, our district also does the federal free lunch program, so there are students who may currently be getting free lunch in our buildings that are not necessarily getting direct certification. So looking at that direct certified, we're about 20% of our students currently are getting direct services based on the number from Mr. Delbridge. About 20% of our students are African American currently. About 14% of our students are in the Hispanic category. If you're looking there, when you're looking at current SPED and current students with disabilities, based on what he has in I now, right now we're looking at about 12%. That would also include, and I should point out that 12% includes gifted students and students who are functionally delayed, both which are not included in the accountability, so that number is going to be a little lower than 12%.
Thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Duke?
Is the 40%, and I know we can't change it, but inside our system, inside our boardroom, is the 40% weight for subgroup accountability, is it punitive?
I don't know if it's punitive. I think what the rationale, and again, let me be careful with my opinion versus what the state's opinion, but I think as a school, when we show growth, and what the state would say is when you show growth with those lowest achieving students, usually that correlates that you're really growing all students. So I don't think punitive, I don't know if I would use that word, as much as just making sure we have as a school a focus, which again, the principals in our district do, have that focus on, are we really moving every student in our building? Are we giving that equal opportunity to every student in our building?
My concern is that when the state dictates that we have to move the lowest achieving students or historically overlooked subgroups, then the attention of administration, additional resources, programs, the emphasis is on that portion of the school. I have heard firsthand from faculty and administrators that say, all of my time, all of my energy, all of my effort, all of my innovation is in my lowest achieving students. And if my high achieving students are getting something, they're getting it on their own personal initiative. Because I don't have time, effort, energy, or resources to do anything, and I'm not rewarded for anything other than making sure that my underachieving students are getting up to speed. And that is a critical concern for me as a board member.
And I think, I'm sorry.
High schools do a good job. You have honors, you have advanced honors, you have AP, you have IB, you have this dual enrollment situation. So there's more that addressing than you think, simply because they do have those elective choices. And then actually guidance counselors, principals steer kids with high 10 ready scores and stuff. You've got the potential. Take this course, take this AP, take this IB course, take that. So we do a pretty good job of that, and you can tell when you look at the TVAS site, what they call the quintile 4 and 5 kids. Are we getting growth out of them? And if you are, you're getting growth out of your high-achieving kids. And we've done pretty well in that also.
I agree.
There's some real places to be rewarded for moving those students. When you think about that ready graduate being with an ACT composite of a 21, there's some real motivation there to make sure we're addressing those needs of students who are 18, 19 on their ACT and moving them up or getting that industry certification. Mr. Zago briefly talked about the subgroup growth. One of the things, because for all students it's TVAS, which we're used to, but for under that subgroup growth, it's actually looking at that move in proficiency bands. This is new because in the past we've always talked about getting kids proficient. Now we're going to have a group of students who are proficient but not yet mastered, which is the highest. And we will actually get rewarded for moving those students from that, yes, they're already proficient, but we actually moved them to mastered, which is the highest designation, and we'll be rewarded for that into the subgroups in this plan as well. So there are places there where it does reward that upward movement of those highest students.
That on track with what we used to call proficient, or in that value added, then we'll reduce the gains. And it's basically this. If you have a student that's falling on that scale of 1 to 99, and they're at 26, yes, you have a big distance. But you also have the 99 student. If you're not maintaining that 99 or moving the 96 student to a 99, they can drop as much as those others do. So our teachers and our administrators really focus on that group as well. In most cases, dealing with that to maintain or improve that as well.
Ms. Moore?
Because they can, you know, really cross each other out.
Ms. Moore, do you have something?
Yeah, I do. And Mr. Dick, I don't know if I can realistically really expect you to answer this question. Can you go back to the slide where you've got the percentages, the categories and the percentages?
Go back one, two more.
School or district were you looking at?
I think it was on the school.
So we'll go to the go back one more. This is the high school one.
Yeah, on the rankings there, when you talk about the achievement and the growth, which you're talking 55% of the grade, math, ELA, science, I'm assuming that that score is tied to or coming from the results of the testing from that
Yes,
school or district.
those two come from the 10 Ready assessment.
So my question is, the last 2 years of 10 Ready, you know what's coming, has been an unmitigated disaster for our state, my opinion. I think a lot agree with me. I don't think those bugs have been worked out yet, and I'm hoping, of course, that some of our legislators are going to take a strong look at this and get involved this next year. But my question is, when our test scores are so unreliable because of the way these tests have been just massacred from the grading perspective and the whole, I mean, I think our districts have done, ours included, and above all, a phenomenal job, our principals and our schools, in responding as best they can and jumping through all these hoops with all the messes that went on. But at the end of the day, when they got to the grading part of it and the assessments and the fact that they couldn't even get their systems to work, so we've got this big, huge question mark to me of how valid are those grades. And now we're talking about with ESSA that this is going to make up 55% of our grade when we don't even know that the tests themselves are valid. I mean, is the state giving any answers to or direction on that kind of core question?
Yeah, and on that I'll probably defer back to Mr. Odom. And what he's getting, you know, because I think you're right. I don't want to speculate my opinion on,
And I don't mean to put you on
that
that
as well.
putting you on the spot. And
yeah.
it's not, and I don't think this is not in any way, shape, or form any kind of a black eye on our district at all.
And I would
It's a
agree, our
state
schools have done a tremendous job
They are,
the last couple of years
absolutely.
in working through some of those challenges for sure.
Okay.
I'd love to do two things. Same thing 2 years in a row, which we haven't been able to do. They do the process now where you have a 5-year standard setting. So subject by subject, you know, they set the standards and then build the test to match, to assess those standards. Then they go to another subject the second year and a different one the third. I think the process is kind of in place to go forward that hopefully won't see what we've done, you know, in the past. This year, in grades 6 through 12, we'll do all online testing. That'll be different. Next year, you'll have to include 5th grade in that. Right now, the state is saying, and they backed off, they didn't originally say this, that they intend to keep any of the assessments below the 5th grade paper and pencil. Certainly subject to change, but they think that those kids may not be ready to do it online. You know, assessments and tests are always questionable. Here's my biggest concern. Get the results back to us early enough that when we're planning for the next year, that if we need to make adjustments, scheduling, that sort of thing, do school improvement plans. You know, this year, all of our schools had to have their school improvement plan in by September 1. Third grade, second through 8th, still haven't gotten their proficiency scores, but they had to have the improvement plan in. So the one thing that the directors keep saying to them, if you're going to grade us, you're going to score us, get it back so we have time to make a change. We're not 2 years into it before we see it. I hope that happens. The parent report this year, the draft I've seen of the parent report is going to be better than what parents have seen probably before. A little more information, how your kid did in comparison to the state, to your school in relation to other schools in the district, and then it's got sections in it that tells parents what next, what do they need to do to bring that score up and all. So with Mr. Evans and I are talking, we're gonna put some links on our website and stuff for parents to kind of look at. But I think initially that'll be difficult for people to interpret because it's the first time. But there is some things in place to try to help parents, students, everybody understand what does this mean. And hopefully we're beginning to get there in that process.
Anything else?
Question on this same slide, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, Mr. Jordan. On the Ready Graduate,
Yes.
I know you said it wasn't going to be factored in this year, but
It will be factored in, but just with the ACT.
right, and that's what I meant, because my question is actually about the workforce readiness. Are there standards or criteria that have been established? I mean, how are they going to determine the workforce readiness has been met, or at what level?
Ms. Pilgrim's here, but they're looking at industry certification through our CTE, and I don't know if Ms. Pilgrim wants to add to that, but specifically looking at that industry certification for our students in the CTE process.
If it's a CTE and you earn an industry certification, some kind of credentialing, maybe another way to say it, then that would count as one of your ESP, early post-secondary opportunity. Other things would be AP courses that you take and how many of those to get it, or IB courses. The ASFAB has to be worked out yet. We don't have numbers on that. But they actually created a number of ways you could get it. You can't do it, and I'd say to parents, anybody that's listening, you're not going to get this in your senior year. If you're going to get early post-secondary opportunities, our counselors know it, our principals know it. We've got two sitting with us at least out here this evening. You have to counsel these students and try to get them placed in the process where they can earn those early post-secondary. And we do pretty good at that, and we'll get better because we've got to. Dual credit, dual enrollments count, right.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you, Mr. Duke.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Number 10.
Number 10 is transportation. And of course, we had some questions that we received on radios, repeaters, and issues. On August 10th, 2017, Lynn Pater of the Purchasing Department and Mike Snell met with Chuck Jones of Motorola Solutions to discuss our inability to communicate effectively with the bus drivers. His first recommendation is to have a system tech come on site and do a full system maintenance. This would include taking the channel offline to test the internal components of the transmitter and to make sure it is operating as it should, along with sweeping antenna line and testing the antenna itself. This will give us a baseline between the coverage we expect from a properly functioning system and the on-site, in-person knowledge that everything is functioning as it should. Mr. Jones wanted us to understand that this effort most likely will not result in finding a smoking gun that dramatically improves coverage, but it could. We have received from Motorola Services agreement to cover the transit base station at Tiger Hill. This agreement has two components. First, it is a standard one-year services agreement covering any break or fix issues with the MTR 3000 base station in use at Tiger Hill. This agreement covers any technical troubleshooting on-site, repair and replacement of any broken parts. Prior to the commencement of the one-year coverage, a Motorola system technician will be scheduled to do a complete maintenance review of the system. The cost of this service agreement is $1,375 per month, with a grand total of $16,500 per year. The time frame of this maintenance and testing offline would be during our fall break. He also stated we have a wild card that each bus radio also needs to be tested and maintained on an annual basis, just like the base station. Once we have the baseline coverage, we will talk about the next most appropriate steps. Mr. Jones has assigned an engineer who is working on the coverage maps. Recommend approval. The motion is to approve service agreement with Motorola Solutions for the Transportation Department's base radio station for $1,375 per month or $16,500 per year. And this has actually already been bid. It's a statewide contract number 418.
So moved.
Mr. Hodge, Mr. Blair, a second.
Yes, sir.
Any comment, questions? All in favor of the recommendation, please say aye. Aye. The audience needs to know, too, I think, that we discussed many of these, including the transportation last night at length during our work session, so it's not like we're just voting on something without hearing anything about it. We've already discussed it probably thoroughly. Number 11 is Ms. Kim Williams in Finance, who covered this brilliantly last night, and I even forgot to thank her but she is here. And if you have any further questions, is that all right, Mr. Director? We okay? The upkeep on bookkeepers, 2 at the high schools. Anything you might want on that? Number 12.
Number 12 is the ED 2152 certification of compliance with Tennessee Code, annotated section 49.3.310.1A. The superintendent and the chairman of the board of each local education agency shall certify to the commissioner on or before October the 15th of the current school year that all children enrolled in the LEA have been furnished all required textbooks as determined by the commissioner. And this, in some instances, I mentioned last night, might be a set for a CTE classroom or another where it's reference books. Recommend approval of the motion for approval of the 2017-18 ED 2152 certification of compliance report showing all children enrolled in that LEA have been furnished all required textbooks.
Somebody doesn't have a book, do they put you and me in jail?
I guess we have to sign it, no?
Well, we do. It mentions us here. A motion on that?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday. A second? Second. Ms. Moore, thank you. All in favor? If there are no comments, please say aye. Aye. Number 13.
Number 13 is the New Skills for Youth Grant Action Plan. It's through CTE and Walter Hill, and the principal Walter Hill is here also this evening. The New Skills for Youth Grant is presented for approval for the funding period of August 18th, 2017 through April 30th, 2018. The New Skills for Youth Grant is a competitive grant process, and we're awarded $15,000 for Walter Hill Elementary. This money will be used to purchase laptops, a printer, and supplies to assist in the school counseling department. Recommend approval. The motion is to approve the New Skills for Youth Grant for $15,000 to provide funding to purchase laptops, a printer, and supplies to assist in the school counseling department.
Questions, comments for the board? If not, I need a motion. Mr. Young, thank you. A second?
Second.
Mr. Blair, thank you. Any comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Facilities.
14 facilities. This is a Siegel High School Classroom Edition bid. Bids were received for Siegel High School Edition bid number 3286 on Thursday, September the 7th, 2017 at 2:00 p.m. in the Rutherford County School Board's boardroom. Bids were received from 6 companies, included Boger Construction, LLC, Boyce Ballard Construction, LLC, Orion Building Corporation, R.G. Anderson Company, Incorporated, Robert S. Biscayne and Company, and Romock, Incorporated. R.G. Anderson Company had the best and lowest base bid of $4,434,000, which included the classroom edition. On alternates, R.G. Anderson Company came in with alternate number 2, horizontal metal replacement panels on the gym at $362,000, and alternate number 4, construction of corridor closing the courtyard at $290,000. The total of R.G. Anderson's bid is $5,086,000 for the lowest and best bid for Siegel High School Classroom Edition. The project has been funded by the Rutherford County Commission with a construction budget of $5,200,000. Recommend approval of the motion to approve R.G. Anderson and Company for the lowest and best bid on Siegel High School Classroom Edition with bid alternate number 2 and number 4 for a total of $5,086,000 as presented.
I'll move.
Mr. Estes, thank you. A second?
Second.
Mr. Blair, thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being that we had to cut out the lecture room for the school, and I believe there's a classroom or 2 in that. Is that right, Mr. Clardy? I think that since we have a building program going on, we need to add the $1.5 million back in to go ahead and do that work now. So we can have it all done at one time and be through with that school. They are the only high school in the county that doesn't have a lecture room. And from what I've seen, lecture rooms are used quite often, usually daily in these high schools. So.
Is that a motion, Mr. Estes?
That is a motion.
Need a second from somebody, and then the director can comment.
I'll second it and have a comment, if I may, that
Okay.
this is an opportunity to do this, and I'm afraid that if we don't complete this at this time, the opportunity to roll back around to do it may not come. So I would prefer that we pursue it at this time.
And seconded by Mr. Blair. Mr. Hodge, did you want to say something? Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Is there a further comment on that? And I agree with what Mr. Blair said. Before we vote, let's talk about financing, or do we want to wait till we do our building plan and just get this done?
The way we would normally handle this, since it's a request, we would go, the process is to go to health and ed, then to budget and finance. I did find out today they have not issued the bonds for either Oakland Middle, they've approved it, and Siegel High Edition, but they have not issued the bonds yet. So Mr. Sandvig and I would take this additional request to amend the original amount to include this $1.5 million to accomplish these other things prior to the bond. But we will have to go back to budget and finance and, you know, to get approval, and the full commission, of course.
Mr. Odom, is Siegel the only high school that does not have a lecture hall?
I'm not sure as Laverne and Smyrna does.
Or Central Magnet?
No, they do not. Not of the style that you're talking about, Oakland, Riverdale, and Blackman, and that Riverdale, that, you know, like I say, that style.
Okay.
We added Blackman's later, if you remember, in one of the other editions that was actually added in, after it was built. That's what you're requesting here, is to go back and add something to this one.
Mr. Estes, I would, you know, assume that that's the procedures to health and ed, and I assume that's part of, I mean, that is your motion.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the
just let
procedure
the
we've got.
director decide which is the best way to go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
In October, we're going to have a meeting about our building plan, right?
We do the 5-year building projection and plan in October. Mm-hmm. But you see, they've already funded this first amount, or voted to fund this first amount. So in order to award those bids, we're going to have to move pretty quickly on this, because we need to, we want to accept, the first motion is to basically to lock R.G. Anderson in to this base bid, because construction prices are going up.
Right.
You're very much aware of that. But we'll have to early on, if we can now get to health and ed and budget finance and county commission to make this change order, which is one of the alternates in the bid, then we would go ahead and fold that into this. And I think we got some potential to do that, because, again, they haven't already borrowed the bond money for it.
And we've done alternates, a number of alternates with different structures in the past, so this is not an unusual request from us.
It's typical that we have alternates in the bid.
I think it'll also be probably cheaper right now, while they got everything out there.
Yes, sir.
We have a motion and a second. If there are no further comments, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Number 15, financial matters.
Number 15 is for information only, and this is from PESG update for 2016-17. Our contract with PESG has a penalty clause if we do not have a 97% fill rate at 7 o'clock a.m. PESG will be reimbursing Rutherford County $11,835 for the 1,183 unfilled absences that were under this 97% fill rate. This was our first year, and as PESG built up their substitute teacher base, our fill rate has increased.
We had some comments on this last night, and it commented off and on for months. But is there anything else? I don't know how much they missed it by, but they were definitely 6-7% above the year before when they were not in charge of this, and it looked like they improved all year. Isn't that right? I mean,
It got better as they built their number, and they had. They're saying they had a good summer this year recruiting people for the list.
I would assume 100% is probably impossible, but at least they're trying. Any other comments on that, on the substitute fill rate, or? Okay, technology, part B.
Technologies B, the technology department is requesting approval for additional professional services contract with Dell Professional Services. Like many other school systems, we developed our own network as technology and the internet have changed. The technology department wants to continue to fine-tune our network so that we'll handle our current number of schools and students and the growth that we anticipate in future years. As technology worked with Dell consultation during the assessment portion of the already approved SCCM project, additional concerns arose. We have a need to upgrade the existing Microsoft Active Directory 2012 to Microsoft Active Directory 2016. Some schools are still on Microsoft Active Directory 2008. Our constituents made the additional recommendation, our consultant made the additional recommendation that an assessment of the current firewall and content filter environment should be performed. When we started using Sonic Wall, we had our firewall on one server and our content filtering software on a second server. We now utilize 7 servers for these functions. Microsoft Active Directory provides the foundation for the SCCM configuration product, which is now installed and will be used for the management of district-wide workstation and laptops to include patch management, application deployment, and operating system deployment. The summary of the services to be provided are design optimization of our existing Active Directory environment, implementation of Active Directory upgrade, consolidate domain controllers, DNS optimization, and GPO optimization, assist with validating and troubleshooting AD and application dependencies, assessment and optimization of current firewall and content filtering. These services will allow the technology department to maintain and support the continued demands placed on our technology infrastructure due to growth. The cost of the professional services with Dell is $44,900 to be purchased through the Tennessee State contract bid system. Recommend approval. The motion is to approve contract with Dell Professional Services at a cost of $44,900 to provide these professional services. And you can tell it's an issue everywhere if the state is now bidding it out for other districts and all to use. So.
Comments from the board? Need a motion? Mr. Hodge, thank you. A second?
Second.
Mr. Holliday, thank you. Any comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Number 16.
Number 16 is the proposed Rutherford County Schools calendar for 2018-19, the academic calendar. That's on tab 5. And the recommended approval, the motion is to approve the Rutherford County Schools 2018-2019 academic calendar as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. A second?
Second.
Mr. Holliday? Thank you. Any comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Number 17 is the Student Discipline Appeal. Mr. Reed is going to present us our attorney with options and a short discussion. You want to read it while he's coming to the front? Or you want to wait?
Oh, I'll be glad to if you'd like for me to. The board has been requested to review the August 29, 2017 decision of the Disciplinary Hearing Authority to uphold the expulsion of a student from Blackman High School. The student was expelled for 1 calendar year under the board's zero tolerance policy for possession, use, or distribution of illegal drugs on campus pursuant to policy 6.309. This review is pursuant to the provisions of policy 6.317. The policy states the board shall review for the record or the report and shall, 1, affirm the decision of DHA or overturn the decision of the DHA or grant a hearing before the board.
Mr. Reed? Thank you, sir.
Yes. So this matter comes before you as an appeal from the Disciplinary Hearing Authority. This is a zero tolerance offense, which means the state legislature has seen fit to identify certain offenses of a nature that there's very little flexibility that the board or the director has to handle the charges when they're found to be applicable to a particular student. In this case, the possession of drugs on school campus is a zero tolerance offense under state legislation. So that was a finding of the Disciplinary Hearing Authority. So when that comes to you as a board, you have really 3 options at that point. You can affirm the decision of the DHA, you can reverse the decision of the DHA and overturn their decision, or you grant a hearing, have a full hearing on the facts of the case before the board. So those are the 3 options you have. There is not an option to modify disciplinary action taken or to change anything. So that is something that's been taken away from the board because the state legislature has seen fit to identify this as a zero tolerance offense.
Does the board hear from the plaintiff?
No.
I move to overturn the decision of the DHA.
That motion will need a second, of course. I'm sorry?
Second.
Mr. Hodge has seconded Mr. Holliday's motion. We need some time for comment here. I find it unusual, and I'm not blaming anybody, certainly not blaming Dr. Justice at all. She did, and I think we need to say that these people are our employees and some of our finest people. But it's set up backwards, in my opinion. We employ these people. They don't employ us. So the rules that the discipline committee can do, they have 5 options, which include 2 that I might have been willing to vote for. Order removal or suspension upon such terms and conditions as it deems reasonable, or suspend the student for a specified period of time. I might have been willing to vote for those 2, either one of those things. I do know this, but I understand why they did it. I don't hope nobody leaves here and think, well, Mr. Jordan's being critical. Not really. I'm really not. They did their job. They did what they were supposed to do. I don't think that in this particular case, and they're all particular, they're all individual cases, I don't think that the punishment in this case fit the crime of what happened. But I understand it. I do, and I've been on those committees when I was assistant principal and whatnot, and I get it. I don't know how many we have gotten on discipline hearings since I've been on the board, which is 3 years, and many of you have been here 11 years. A couple of you have been here 11 years, so you've gotten plenty of them. But they're they all have certain characteristics in common, almost every one of them. And they go back, say, 5 or 6 years, and they follow the discipline problems that this student has had, and those problems accelerate. They get a little worse and a little worse every incident. Their grades are almost always below average, and if they're in high school, and this is a junior we're talking about, but if they're in high school, they don't have enough credits to really call themselves a junior. Absenteeism is a real problem. We've had them here just in the last year with over 50 absences, which is a sure sign of trouble. And then something major happens and they end up in an alternative school or they end up out of school. None of this is true of this youngster. Not one thing applies to her. Not great. As a matter of fact, it's even better than that. She was tested for every drug, and you all read it. I mean, it's all here. And she is drug-free. Her grades are above average. Her attendance is above average. And she hasn't had a history of discipline problems. Okay, I've said my piece. I hope somebody else will say something.
Well, did you want to talk? You know, we've given authority to these 3 people to do due process and to do their due diligence and their best effort. We know all 3 of these professionals that made this decision, and I do agree with what you said, Mr. Chairman, but I don't know how I can vote to overturn something that has occurred with due diligence and due process. And the situation certainly is unfortunate, but we've had to make these decisions over the years, and they've always are difficult, but I read nothing in the packet that made me feel like the committee did not do their job and do their due diligence.
Yes, please.
This was a real unique case, and it's definitely a challenging one for all of the points that have already been presented. I guess, Mr. Reed, I've got a question for you, I guess, really kind of point of law, because I totally get and want to uphold zero tolerance. I mean, and it's what the state says we have to do. But some of the circumstances of this particular situation regarding the student that we're discussing the discipline for right now, to me, and I don't know it obviously as well as the attorneys do, so that's why I'm asking you, do these particular circumstances that this student was disciplined for, are they truly definable under the possession category that falls under zero tolerance?
The statute is very broad with respect to drugs on campus. Possession of drugs of illegal drugs on campus is a zero tolerance offense under the state statute. So, and in this case, the facts as they were found was there were drugs on campus. Right,
but even though they weren't this student's property, the fact that they were found
in the student's car
still
it's in the student's car, so that's in possession of the student on campus.
So does our zero tolerance statute say or require that this was the required discipline then, that this student had to be expelled for an entire year to the alternative school?
What the zero tolerance statute says, and you can be critical of the statute. I understand the comments that it may not be a good law, so and it may be reasons not to have the law, but it is what the legislature has enacted.
I understand.
And the purpose of because before we had zero tolerance, I remember the days, tells my age, before zero tolerance, where you had a number of school systems making different disciplinary decisions with respect to similar type instances. And the legislature saw fit to identify certain offenses of a severity enough, to be severe enough to say these are going to be zero tolerance offenses. If you commit one of these offenses on school grounds, you are to be expelled for 1 year. And that's what the statute says. There's a provision that allows the director of schools to modify that is expressly for the director of schools on a case-by-case basis. But from the board standpoint, you know, when you hear these things, there's no modification at the board level under statute. The only ability to modify it is by the director of schools. There's not like a range of offenses, a fine or warning or suspension for 5 days. With zero tolerance, the whole purpose of zero tolerance and the idea behind the law, whether it's good or bad, is that you'll be expelled for 1 year because there's zero tolerance for these offenses.
So with the point that was made, and I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but the disciplinary hearing committee, it sounded like had choices to make, but really they didn't then. If they found or it was defined as possession under that zero tolerance, then they did not have any other alternatives as to what discipline to...
Once the disciplinary hearing authority found that a zero tolerance offense had occurred, they have no other authority other than, at that point, to say you're expelled for 1 year. And then it's subject to whatever further review the director of schools wants to have in regards to the matter.
And we have no authority to do anything except affirm, grant a hearing, or do as Mr. Holliday and Mr. Hodge have requested, and that's overturn the decision.
Correct.
Mr. Reed, if we're to accept that this is a part of the due process and this appeal can only be counseled by you, can you make an argument that this student did not have possession defined as the power and intent to control the disposition of this material? Can you make an argument that this student did not have possession?
I don't know if I understand your question. The disciplinary hearing authority found that this student did have possession of a drug on campus. So those findings that are coming before the board, which is the record you have before you, is a finding that this student did possess illegal drugs on campus.
And my motion is to overturn that finding. Can you make an argument in support of my motion that this student did not indeed have possession defined as the intent to control the disposition of this material?
Well, there's no arguments to be made. The options before the board are three. You can affirm the decision or overturn it, which is the motion before the board tonight, or grant a hearing. So if you're talking about argument one way or the other, that is along the lines of granting a hearing to address the matter. If you want to grant a hearing, what you typically would do is say we vote to grant a hearing, and then you would come back and schedule a time for a hearing before the board, and the school system would present its set of facts, the parents or whoever student present their set of facts for the board to determine what you want to do in regards to the matter. So it's, at this point, it would be inappropriate for me to make an argument one way or the other, because that's not the options you have before you at this point. The options you have as a board are the one motion which you have made, which is certainly within the discretion of the board to approve or vote as the board chooses to do. You can affirm the decision or grant a hearing. So those are the three options that you as a board have as this matter is currently procedurally before you tonight.
Mr. Reed, can you cut this? This is the first time that I've encountered, the decision-making to this point. Can you kind of educate me a little bit more on what hearing option involves if the board were to make that determination and grant a hearing? Because I keep thinking too about, these students are underage, there's privacy issues, those kind of things, and I think it's so important that we respect and honor that for the sake of the student and the parents. So how does the hearing process actually work?
The hearing is generally public, so it's generally a public hearing, so you have that. It will be similar to something like a zone exemption hearing, where you have you will have the parents present their side of the story, the school system, the personnel involved present their side of the story, and then it's up to the discretion of the board to decide whether the zero tolerance offense occurred or not. If the board found that a zero tolerance offense had occurred, then at that point, really the only disciplinary options you have are to expel the student for a year. So if you found that a zero tolerance offense did not occur, of course, there would be no finding of a violation at that point. So there'd be no discipline at that. It would be the closest thing that you will have seen to that will be a zone exemption hearing, where you have parents coming before you explain their side of the story. In this case, you would have school personnel probably also explain what they found in regards to the matter, and it'd be up to the board to decide what it wanted to do, and it could ask questions of all the people involved.
Mr. Hodge.
I was just gonna make, if I understood you right, and I think I'm correct. I've seen many of these things. Mr. Odom, you're the only one that can modify it, correct?
Correct.
So, and I've seen that done. So if the board went with the decision one way or another, it's something Mr. Odom could adjust time-wise. Is that correct?
We do, and I work with the alternative school typically in zero tolerance. When in places that they have a point system, they earn their way out. Some of them have an accelerated process based upon that student's work, behavior, that sort of thing. And so then the alternative school person makes a recommendation back to me. I modify again, you modified to us, modify to return that student back to the home school in that case. So it's extremely rare for anybody to be a year because they earn their way out. And so I work closely with those alternative school principals, their guidance counselors and all, to see how that student is progressing and what's happening. But I typically depend upon their feedback in that because I'm not the one standing there, at the time and seeing once they're at the talk, how they're behaving, are they attending regularly, what's happening there, in relation to that. So yes, I modified as about everybody that goes to the alternative school receives a modification to come back early unless their longest time is typically the 55 days that they can earn their way out. But if they do good behavior, their work and stuff, then they accelerate that opportunity to come back out.
So, Mr. Odom, when they say, and there was conversation about the sentence being for a year, but somebody said calendar year. So help me understand, in this case, are we talking through the end of this calendar year that she's been expelled?
The statute.
Or the school year?
The statute is the calendar year. In other words, if a student today, the 20th of September, committed a zero tolerance, if the parent didn't request to me to do a modification, or it was one I could modify, they could not enter school next year until September 21st. I'm correct.
That's correct.
So it is a calendar year. That's in the statute. Let me say another couple of things to kind of help you understand it a little bit. When an offense comes to the disciplinary hearing committee and it seems to fall under that zero tolerance, they have to listen to the information. Now, there's two levels. These are under Tennessee law. These are called administrative hearings, which means what is the preponderance of the evidence in this case. Now, if we were a judge, jury, and you were in court, it would be beyond reasonable doubt, possibly. But the level of proof is less in Tennessee's administrative hearings, which covers disciplinary hearings, than it is in a court situation. So they listen to the evidence, the school, what other evidence presented, testimony of the people involved, written statements, that sort of thing. And then in the case where it's zero tolerance, they have, as Mr. Reed expressed, they have one choice. Yes, this is zero tolerance, or no, it is not zero tolerance. So in this case, what your hearing committee said, yes, this meets the conditions of the zero tolerance. But you as a board have a chance, obviously, you can say no to that. But that's the only choice they had at that point. Had they ruled it was not a zero tolerance, then even the disciplinary hearing committee, and they do from time to time, will modify it themselves because the statute kicking in where the director has to do it doesn't apply if it's not a zero tolerance.
Are there any restrictions on you as far as when you make those modifications, that there has to be like a minimum? I know that the student has already been at the alternative school for a certain number of days. This was very, very difficult and challenging because back to Mr. Jordan's comments, you know, it's pretty clear, even though I've never met this student, that this student doesn't belong in alternative school, and I could see it being so detrimental to her future. So, you know, if the student complies, does everything they're supposed to do, I mean, are you able to make those modifications fairly quickly?
Yes, but again, I usually depend upon, again, because I'm not at the school, but I depend upon what feedback I get from the alternative school. The other situation you've got to see, you must be consistent. In the given for a year, most of the kids at the alternative school are not bad kids. They're teenagers who've made a mistake. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that fall under the zero tolerance policy in some cases. Some people at the alternative school are remandments, and they're of a different type nature than do not fall under zero tolerance. But much of the ones there, it's not a school that's loaded with people who are incorrigibles by any means at all. It's teenagers who made a mistake, do something wise, you know, but happen to fall under some kind of a disciplinary rule. But anything I've said incorrect, or you like?
I think you said it's correct. Yes, yes.
I'm very comfortable that the rarity of this board's consideration of ever overturning the decision of the disciplinary hearing authority is sufficient to speak to the exceptional nature of this situation. In addition to that, I would say this student belongs exactly where they are today, because sometimes when you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the wrong things happen in your presence, then you get swept up in the mix of being with the wrong crowd. And but along the way, when you sift it out and when you get down to the actual facts, I am quite satisfied that the motion is appropriate, and would encourage my fellow board members to consider making this the end of this difficult process.
With that said, I want to respond to Mr. Blair for a minute and just say to him that our discipline committee did what they thought was best, and they did their job. And it bothers me, and I guess it's obvious, so I'm going to vote for this motion, I think. But it bothers me for my vote to be interpreted, well, they were wrong. They didn't do the right, and not to support these three people, and I'm not going to name them, but they're outstanding employees who intended to do the right thing. Also, just one other point, and any other board member can comment. The zero tolerance, or really discipline rules in general, but the zero tolerance is meant to, and most of them involve drugs, alcohol, horrible firearms, and perhaps violence of some sort, a fight of some sort. I'd say 95% of them are somewhere in that general area. And we have that law. That law is there, and it's there to protect people, protect all the fellow students in the school, staff, anybody else that might be there. And okay, I'm okay with that. I don't believe this student right here is any threat to anybody. I strongly believe that. I may eat those words, but I don't think so. So I think I'm gonna, if it's an error on my part, I'm gonna err on the common sense, and I'm gonna vote for this motion. And I appreciate Mr. Holliday making it, and Mr. Hard seconding it. Are there other comments from board members on this very difficult and unusual case? Really, it is unusual.
I guess I would like to ask my fellow board member, Mr. Holliday, for some clarification, because when you made this motion, it was to overturn the decision, but you said just a moment ago that, and I believe your words were, you were convinced that the student was in the right place. Well, the student is in the alternative school now and expelled. So that would seem to contradict your motion to overturn the decision for the student to be there. So I just want to understand.
In that comment, I'm making an analogy that may not be exactly 100%, but sometimes you can get arrested for something, you can get charged for something, you can even be found guilty of something, and then on appeal, it can be overturned. And that's not to say that you didn't do something wrong, you weren't in the wrong place, you weren't doing the wrong thing, you weren't involved with something that you better not ever be a part of again, but you happened to make it out. From my perspective, in this very difficult role, I am convinced that it is time for this student to make it out of this process.
Mr. Reed, again, I go back to the point of, if we're overturning, we are in essence saying we don't think it needs to be modified now. We're saying we don't think that this was a zero tolerance offense. Am I right?
That's basically what you're saying, yes.
And I would respond to that with, I am convinced that possession has not been defined sufficiently, and that this student at no time had the power and intent to control the disposition of the material in question.
The vehicle that the drugs were in, was that owned by this student, or was it?
It was the student's car that
Student's
drove to school.
Okay.
And if I understand from the facts of the case, the student did give permission for those items to be left in her vehicle, correct?
That's what the record indicates, yes.
I think my motion at this point, I would make a motion at this point that,
Point of order.
Well, wait a minute now. We've got a motion in a second. Well, it's true. There's nothing to amend, is I believe we have to vote. We have to vote on this
You have a
motion.
motion and a second on the floor, which the board needs to act on.
Yeah. I have every feeling that we're probably split, so maybe we need to call the roll. The motion, read it again. Okay. Yes.
No. No.
No.
Yes.
Mr. Holliday?
Yes.
Mr. Sturman? Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
4 yes, 3 no.
Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Let me ask you a question for sure. So, basically in this case, it's not a zero tolerance. Does it go back to the school? Right. At that level, is it kind of like in the court system, it'd go back to the school with not being a zero tolerance?
It would return back to the school, yes, the zone school.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. I think I can speak for the board when I say this. We don't like these things. We try to do the right thing. I hope we did. Hope for this youngster's sake that we did. Obviously, I think we did, but we never know, do we? Number 18.
Number 18 is the insurance update. The insurance committee voted to change our employee medical insurance rate structure so that the participation in the wellness part of our medical insurance would generate a $30 per month discount on the employee's monthly premium instead of a $30 per month upcharge. A technical correction was made to the retiree medical insurance rates for 2018. The rates will be discussed and voted on when all of the 2018 rates were set. The materials that were distributed did not properly show the increases as described. Per our on-the-job injury program, is still saving the entire county well over $1 million per year when compared to the cost of the traditional employers or additional workers' comp program. Dr. Anthony did speak with Melissa Street today, additionally, based on some of the questions that you asked last night. But this is not a motion, it's just information. If you want to hear that or not, you can share what she learned.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be a great idea.
Well, I talked to Melissa Street, who's the Director of Risk Management, and she said basically that after this being the 4th year with the program, after the first 2 years, many of the employees were talking about they wanted it to be more of an incentive, more of a palatable situation. So going with that, they have been lifting, what they call lifting the premiums. And so, of course, what that means is if you go through the wellness program and you do your checkup and your online aspect, then you will have a cost savings instead of being charged the $30 a month. So basically, if you do what you're requested to do, you do not have that additional charge. So they call that a lifting of the wellness program. And then she said also on the numbers, one of the questions last night was, what about the numbers of people who have been affected by the Board of Education of having to pay that amount? They said that they do not keep a record of that right now, and so they're calculating that and will give that to us at our insurance meeting on Thursday.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony.
Questions from anyone? Anything from Director's update that we did not discuss last night?
Nothing new.
Anything, Ms. Moore, from Tennessee Legislature?
No, nothing to report, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Holliday, Federal?
We had the pleasure of getting to know a fellow named Peter Oppenheim, and he had served for some time as the chief counsel to the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee that Chairman Lamar Alexander, our state senator, chairs. And Peter Oppenheim had opened a relationship with Tennessee School Boards Association, and and I have had the pleasure of emailing him from time to time. In the recent weeks, he has been confirmed as the deputy to Chairman DeVos, and he is now the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Education. And he will sit at Chairman DeVos's, Secretary DeVos's elbow and continue to advise her. And I'm quite confident that he will reflect all of the best characteristics out of Senator Alexander's office, that we return control of education to the local school board.
Questions for Mr. Holliday? General discussion by board members. Thank you, Mr. Holliday. We have our building program. Is that next on our agenda? No. Work session is the 17th, 19th, and 23rd, all at 5 o'clock, aren't they? Anything else from any board member? Mr. Young.
On this money that we're getting returned back from PESG, I'd like to see us be able to utilize that money somehow to reward or show some kind of recognition to our administration staff and our teachers for the excellent scores that they're turning out. So if we can find some way to do that, I think that would be a great idea.
Did you hear what he asked?
There's a meeting next, Spurlock, is it next Tuesday, when the commissioner, that group? And I sent you that information. He'd just like a county if you want to attend. This is not a media event. The state said do not bring media. You got visiting commissioners coming in to look at really the mechatronics program and our pathways. The real push across the country, and for us too, is the seamless process of students going from the classroom to some form of post-secondary work, TCAT, college, whatever it is. That program is one that has the model they would like to try to maybe apply to health science and other things too. But it's not a, it's really going to be question and answer probably from those commissioners. How did you do this? What did it cost to do it? What results are you having from it, and that sort of thing. But it's not an event, and I don't think the commissioner will even come. I think it's really going to be someone from the CTE office. It's kind of they leave us and then go straight to Warren County TCAT to look at the mechatronics program that Warren County has with TCAT there. We do more of ours in school with mechatronics. Then they can go to either Motlow or TCAT or MTSU, for the full degree. Up there, basically, Motlow in their schools, unless they've changed it. I mean, the schools up there do not have mechatronics in their individual buildings like we do, but it's kind of the dual enrollment thing to kind of where they go out of the building into a TCAT site to do it. So it's kind of two little different models trying to accomplish the same thing. So just to tell you, that's what it is. So if you do want to come so we can give Mr. Spurlock account, just let Ms. Michaels know.
I have to take the opportunity, and all the other board members can sing along if they'd like, but this is another example where we have 8 commissioners from other states that are coming to Tennessee to see exemplary performance in public education. When they come to Nashville to the Department of Education and they say, show us exceptional performance in public education, they bring them to Rutherford County. Because of that, what we do in Rutherford County schools, every citizen in Rutherford County, when you pay your property taxes, when you invest your public goods into the public coffers, when you shop in Rutherford County, the impact is worldwide, because what we do in Rutherford County is what Nashville holds up as the example for Tennessee, and Tennessee is the example for at least 8 other states in this instance, where 8 other commissioners are coming to our state to see how it's done right. And our state is the example for the United States of America, and the United States of America undoubtedly is still the example for public education worldwide.
Board, is that a positive note to end on? If there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.